this is Ashlyn Warda with the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. Today, I'm here with our president, Jenna Robinson, to discuss some model legislation that was recently put forth by the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, the Goldwater Institute, and Stanley Kurtz for the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Jenna, could you tell us briefly what the model legislation is about?
Sure. So the purpose of the model legislation is to stop universities from requiring job candidates to submit diversity statements. And what diversity statements are personal essays about a job candidate's views on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that person's past experiences with DEI, and how he or she acts to further DEI, or will act to further DEI if they are hired. And in my view, and in the view of the other authors of this model legislation, these statements are de facto political litmus tests.
Okay. Could you tell us more about what prompted you, the Goldwater Institute, and Stanley Kurtz to write this legislation?
Right. So we noticed that these statements were increasingly being used at colleges and universities, and they're even being used in K-12 education sometimes now. And traditionally, they were not part of how faculty are hired and are not a good metric of how faculty members, how valuable they will be to the institution. Traditionally, faculty candidates at public universities have been evaluated based on cover letters, CVs, research statements, teaching statements. All of these things contribute to the academic mission of their job. A DEI statement, on the other hand, is looking into a candidate's politics. And I think that that's inappropriate for a public university to do. It is essentially screening out candidates with unorthodox views or with views that are not part of the campus groupthink. And it's really not an institution remaining neutral. It's an institution furthering a political ideology.
For anyone who isn't familiar, could you give us just a general example of the concern behind diversity, equity, and inclusion, just their overall agenda?
Right. So I think, you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it sounds great. Who would not want to have a diverse campus where everyone is included and treated as equals? But that's not actually what's happening. When people say diversity, they mean diversity of everything but thought. When they say inclusion, that has somehow morphed to segregation. And when they say equity, they mean that everyone will have the same outcomes rather than everyone will be treated as equals. And I think that that's problematic on a number of levels. But I think the biggest problem is that it is undermining meritocracy on campus, and it's supplanting a political ideology for campus excellence.
Yeah, I think the lack of diversity in thought is a very key concern there. So in his article for the National Review, Stanley Kurtz stated that the more prestigious the school, the more the practice is favored, a sign that diversity statements are likely to spread to many more schools, end quote. In your experience with higher education institutions, have you seen an increase in these attempts to include DEI, especially in North Carolina?
Absolutely. I first started seeing some job positions requiring DEI statements maybe about 2 years ago. It probably started happening before then, but that's when it first got on my radar. And in the beginning, it wasn't every position. It was just one here or there, usually in an especially political department, like maybe the Department of Education, or the School of Education. But now when I search university job postings, nearly every single posting that I look at requires something having to do with DEI. Even if the position itself is in a hard science or a STEM field, it asks candidates about their opinions on DEI, how they're going to further DEI. And frankly, it's unclear to me how a physics professor would be doing this in their classroom without getting way off topic. A physics professor is there to teach physics, not to engage in, political proselytization.
Yeah, so now that you guys have put forth the model legislation, what do your next steps look like in this process?
The next steps are to get legislators and policymakers interested in this model legislation, and to really advocate for the good it can do. So we want this to get out to as many people as possible. We want to share it as widely as we can, and we want to provide the research and the information that legislators need to make good decisions.
So for anyone who may be listening or just learning more about DEI, their initiative, what can just your average person do to help halt this in higher education?
I think the best thing that an average person can do, especially if they're a parent or a citizen or a student, is to look at what, their university, their alma mater is doing in this space so that they're aware of what's going on. And I think they can also read our critical social justice in the UNC system report, especially if they're North Carolinians, to learn about the ways that this DEI ideology is being implemented in our universities.
Alrighty. Well, if there's nothing else that you'd like to share, we can end here. But if you have any extra comments on the matter, feel free to share.
Absolutely. So I just want to say that we'll put all the links in the discussion box on our YouTube channel. So if you want to find the Critical Social Justice Report or links to our End Political Litmus Tests and Education Act, those will all be in the description box. Thank you.